Hello, Government B students. This is Mrs. Miller. I'm going to cover some things here today that will help you hopefully on your Unit 4 test. Just review a couple things, help it, maybe if you hear me saying it, it'll cement itself in your brain a little better. Have it arranged kind of thematically, so it's not going to go through just, each question on the test one by one, but it's kind of I grouped everything together that you'll find. So you will find all of these topics on the test. So I do recommend paying attention, taking notes. You can even watch it a couple times before you take it. So here I go. Let's start. If my slide changes. There we go. So we're going to start off with interest groups. Interest groups operate. I'm just going to make up words. Groups operate at all levels of government. Because there are so many interest groups, they often conflict with each other. Meaning there's going to be one that it's going to be like the moms against guns, and then the NRA. They're going to conflict, and they're different interest groups who are wanting different rules on the same topic. Purposes of interest groups include they want to persuade people to see issues the way that their members see them, as well as persuade policymakers to see things the way they see them and vote that way, and influence public policy. They also want to gain influence with those lawmakers, so that if Bob is really cool and he is helping fund your campaign, you might lean towards Bob's ideas when it comes to voting on something, like a law or such. Not exactly the, most, what's the word I'm looking for, ideal way of doing things, but it is very, very common. Those who work for interest groups are often referred to as lobbyists. They apply pressure and aim to sway opinions in all aspects of public policy. Interest groups, unlike political parties, do not nominate candidates for office, but they can endorse them. So plenty of candidates have endorsements from very large interest groups and tell all of their members that this is who they would like them to vote for. As campaign costs have increased over the years, it's fair to assume that interest groups have more influence because they have more money to offer to those campaigns. And organized interest groups apply pressure to politicians with campaign contributions, which are usually done through political action committees or PACs, and use of propaganda and lobbying. Professional groups are a different kind of group that help influence policy and government. And they do have influence in government. These people are often, when we talk about some of them at least, brought in to talk about certain things in Congress, asked questions to help lawmakers better understand things, and also they have their own types of lobbies to help make things that they need to be in effect. So some of those groups, professional groups, are going to be things like the American Medical Association, the American Bar Association, which is not a group for bartenders, that is for lawyers, and American Federation of Teachers. There are many, many more, but I decided to stop at 3 so you wouldn't have a whole page, like pages upon pages of abbreviations of these groups. International affairs, I almost said internal affairs. U.S. international affairs, this is kind of a jump from those professional groups, but this is the next little theme. One of the things I want you to know for the test is that there are contrasting foreign policies that the U.S. followed before World War I and into World War I and then into World War II. That shift that happened between that time can be seen as going from isolationism to internationalism. Before World War I, Americans really didn't want to enter the war. They were very hesitant. They really, a lot of Americans still felt tied to their homelands in Europe, but they still wanted to be patriotic Americans too, so they were very conflicted, and a lot of that led to an isolationism. And then later, they were hesitant to enter World War II as well. But then when Pearl Harbor happened, everybody really wanted to be part of it. And after World War II, the U.S. became a more international power and had much more international influence. And leading into the Cold War, the U.S. became one of the top world powers. Since the end of the Cold War, most of the U.S. foreign policy has been in regards to the Middle East, and that's pretty much all of your guys' lifetime and before. Um, Everything in our news is continuously about things that have happened in the Middle East and how we, as the United States, interact with that. It's an area that has lots of money and lots of oil and lots of influence because of that. So, the US always tries to kind of help maintain balance over there and sometimes getting itself into more trouble because of it. But that's, yeah, I'll get off my soapbox. Changes in the US domestic policies. In the early days of the US, Americans were really focused more on domestic affairs rather than being involved in international politics and affairs because the US was just a baby nation. And this baby nation needed to grow. Who who would think that this young country had the authority to step in and tell other people what how they should do things. They also the U.S. didn't have. I mean, the U.S. was in debt after the Revolutionary War, so it was mainly the U.S. was trying to get on its feet. So that was very isolationist and focused on domestic policy at that point. But changes in domestic policy came with major events in U.S. history. Two such events were the Civil War and the Great Depression. And with that, like the Civil War, domestic policies had to change because they had to kind of find that balance of how the Union and the Confederacy would interact, while all falling under the because the Union still considered the Confederacy as part of the country. And then in the Great Depression, domestic policies changed because of mainly the oh, my brain just totally went blank of like the organizations and all of the things that the government put into play under FDR's New Deal. The federal government played little to no role in education until the late 19th and early 20th century. It was very common for many people not even to go to high school until after the Great Depression. Well, during the Great Depression. I have after on here. I meant during. And that was largely because of the fact that if people thought that if they could keep the kids in school, then they wouldn't take the jobs the adults needed. Income tax rates for all Americans since 1964 have been lowering, with the highest decrease in the upper income brackets. And I know that's kind of out of nowhere, but it is an important part that I want you to understand. That since 1964, the taxes have been lowering consistently, with that highest decrease for the richest people. Domestic financial policies. That last thing on taxes I probably should have put in here. I probably moved it up because it was full though. Financial policies can be found all the way back to the Constitution. The Commerce Clause was put in the Constitution to create and regulate infrastructure and public utilities, not political utilities. Over the last century, the federal government's approach to public utility companies could be described as protection and regulation of broad monopolies, as in, like, there were large companies that maintained energy, large companies that ran the phone companies, things like that. And it was protecting kind of those broad monopolies. And then the first half of that was for the first half of the century. And the second half of the century was the deregulation of it in of those large monopolies or broad monopolies. Deregulation of the financial industry is established with the passage of the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. Another kind of random fact that I knew you guys wouldn't necessarily remember, so I wanted to put it on this so you guys remember it for your test. Pardon my dog making weird noises in the background if you hear her. We can see the U.S. Belief in free trade in areas like participation in the Bretton Woods Conference, support for the WTO and trade regulations with it, and then participation in NAFTA. And this is just opening up to more globalization. Environmental policy. Environmental policy is an important part of the more recent past and growth of our country's domestic and international affairs. The National Environmental Policy Act was an important piece of legislation for the environment because it created the Council on Environmental Quality and the Environmental Protection Agency, which is the one we hear most about, and that's the EPA. The Council on Environmental Quality helps carry out environmental policy by coordinating environmental agencies and formulating impact statements. So it really helps to coordinate the agencies so everybody's working together rather than having conflicting things. And then making broad statements so people can understand the importance of environmental quality. While environmental issues have grown in awareness, the fossil fuel industry continues to receive the most subsidies and tax breaks from the federal government. So that's one that, if you are someone who's interested in environmental studies, that's a big point of contention with between environmentalists and the government, is the fact that the fossil fuel industry receives the most money in subsidies and tax breaks. Okay, and then there are two essay questions in this test. One is in an essay of 150 or more words. Identify and describe 3 ways that interest groups influence public policy. Make sure to include in your answer how or why interest groups are effective at influencing public policy. So make sure that you talk about some means that they use to influence public policy, and then how it's effective. And then the next essay question, President Clinton signed the Kyoto Treaty of 1997, binding the U.S. to dramatically reduce its carbon emissions, but Congress and subsequent presidents refused to sign this treaty. In an essay of 1 to 2 paragraphs, explain which types of interest groups likely would have fought this legislation, and explain why as a nation we don't support this treaty. How and why might have interest groups convinced policymakers to reject the Kyoto Treaty. So this one you really want to look at the fact that Clinton was more of an environmentalist. Subsequent presidents may have been influenced by interest groups and subsequent congressional members as well. So those are your essay questions. If you have watched this for your live class, give me a call when you finish, and we can talk about it for a couple minutes and make sure you're prepared for the test. Good luck on your test, and I look forward to talking to you.